language. And she basically said that foreign language education is in a state of crisis. And there is a danger if we don't start looking at the way we're teaching language and try to come up with changes and alterations to what we're currently doing that would better fit our students' needs, as well as how English is changing and the environment that we're living in. So those were like the three main aspects that she was looking at. And she outlined some of the issues, the dangers, and then she also talks about some of the solutions. And so we'll go over that today. I'll stop here and there and just ask if there are any questions or anything that rings true to you from your own perspective as an English teacher and or person of interest in English. Okay, so the first thing that Dr. Kramch did was she wanted to define foreign language, because in the States there's very different definitions that people go by, and she wanted to make sure that all of us sitting in the audience were clear what she meant. So, foreign language, language learned in institutional settings by speakers of the dominant language. So here, English is a foreign language, right? Because people in the dominant language are sitting in an institution learning English. So it's the same. We can look at it in the same way. The second language is language taught to the immigrant community within the United States. So that's how it's looked at. Okay, so one of the first things that she was talking about is how globalization is really making it more difficult for us to get a handle on what is English, how should we be teaching English in the classroom, and how we are teaching it now, and how should we be teaching it, those questions in between that, like what is going on, what are the changes that have been made, and what should we do. So basically, one of the pillars of this, and this was from the work of Blumhardt in 2010, we have community, culture, communication, and information. These are the aspects that we think about when we think of language. And these are also the aspects that come into sort of a problem area when we think of globalization. Because as we share more information about our different communities and about our different cultures, we change, we alter, some say we grow, some say we regress. It's all, based on your specific viewpoint. But the point is, with globalization, we no longer are not impacted by the rest of the world. And this includes the English language and its usage. So basically, globalization is disturbing what we have constructed to be our specific social realities. Right? So if we look at our social reality, think of your social reality in Kyiv like 10 years ago. And then you think of it now and all of the influxes that have changed because of globalization, because of politics, the economy, etc., etc. These are what she's talking about. These are the backgrounds that she's saying we're constantly creating new realities. And what we're doing with English is not taking into account these new realities, because we have a more modernist approach to our way of teaching English. And what she was saying is basically we look for order and stability in the language. So what that looks like is there's a correct way to use it and there's an incorrect way to use it. And you can measure that through assessment. But what we know is that that's not really true. I mean, we have defined it to be this way, and she says that one of the things that these authors have argued for is that the native speaker is responsible for the definition of what English will be. And for the US as well as the UK, one of the things that she was mentioning is actually English has become politicized because the US considers it to be a national security interest area, the study of English, because it's communication, how it can encourage or discourage people to work with the United States, right? So from a US perspective, that is there in the language and in the perception of English. Is that making sense? Mm-hmm. So that has us assess English in certain ways as well. So we have things like the TOEFL or the TOEIC, all these forms of assessment that say what standard English is. So in order to have everybody buy into this concept of a standard English, we have the myth of the native speaker. And this is a myth that I've seen played out in many different cultures and countries. So basically what this myth is, it's an idea that is created in the teacher, the student, whoever's mind about what it would be like to speak English. So they want to be like the native speaker. They have an idea of what it would be to be like the native speaker, and this idea was formed through their exposure to culture, through movies, through reading, through internet, YouTube, whatever. So they may think of the native, they have an image, a perception of the native speaker. They want to fit in that perception of the native speaker as well with their English studies. So the best way I can think of to explain this, it's like when I go to get my hair cut, and this happens every time, I'll like clip out a picture of somebody that I want to have my hair look like, right? And I go in and let's say I have like Catherine Zeta-Jones. Do you know who she is? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So I'll be like, I want my hair to look like this. And the hairstylist does it, and I look, and I'm like, but I don't look like that. Like, I'm trying to channel Catherine Zeta-Jones through my haircut. It's not working because I'm not Catherine Zeta-Jones. In the same way that when we think of the concept of the native speaker, we take on the culture of the native speaker, we take on the idea of the native speaker, and we're not the native speaker. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so how this myth, how she was saying why it's a problem is because oftentimes you'll have a native speaker and a non-native speaking teacher who actually knows more than the native speaker does about certain elements of the language, right? But the issue comes when the non-native English speaking teacher is marginalized because they are a non-native speaking teacher, right? So I've seen this happen in departments where someone may have had more knowledge about an area of linguistics or something than I did, but the department head immediately came to me because I was the native speaker. I must know it all. And I'm like, why would you do that? This person is like an expert in the field. And they're like, well, you're the native speaker. And it's, well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean I'm an expert in everything, right? So there's this perception that is inaccurate about the native speaker that is in ourselves, in our students, and in administration, which can cause issues, and which is something to consider as we continue to define what is important about English to teach and how. Another element unfortunately you can't, this is cut off, but this is Li Wei and Zhu Hua in 2014. Cramp quoted them because she wanted to talk about languages when you're in class. So the example that she used was from them, where they were saying that people come in, they want to learn Chinese, but they don't want to learn it in a Chinese style of learning. They want to learn it in a style of learning that they're comfortable with. But part of the Chinese style of learning is culturally bound. And some of your understanding of the language and the culture comes from that style of learning. So what globalization does is it has us come in and say, okay, I know that the communicative method is the best way, and so I want to study Chinese in that way. But it may not be the best way to learn Chinese. Right? So these are all elements. You have people like me coming in, talking to you about communicative method and this and that for English, but for your students in the cultural setting that they have, is that the best way? You know, we always, and I always try to say, you know, make sure that you adapt it culturally. But the idea that even I am here coming in and saying, so, this is the way to do X, Y, and Z, should be questioned.